We're speaking here today and we're talking about the reopening of our schools, and I'd imagine that all over the country educators are listening in to what we have to say, and I'd imagine not only are they listening to what we have to say, they're listening to where it is that we're saying it. And I do want to make the point that it's not directed at the Minister, because he clearly has no control over this, but more at the political establishment themselves. That when we're speaking here in an auditorium of several hundred spare seats with a distance of 20 and 30 metres between us, all over the country there's classrooms and teachers teaching in classrooms that are overcrowded and placing their health at risk, and we shouldn't ever step away from that fact. It looks arrogant. It gives into that it gives into that belief that there's one rule for some and other rules for others, and I think we need to step away from that because we're not demonstrating any leadership here. In terms of the reopening of schools, look, the reopening of schools was the minimum expectation we should have had as a modern society. But one of the things that I've been disillusioned by was some of the commentary that was being stemmed from the Minister said in their comment, the rush to the road to normality, when we know full well what normality looks like for many people in our schools. Surely we should have a bigger vision than a rush to return to a scenario where we have one of the largest overcrowded teacher-to-pupil ratios in the OECD. Our normality looks like an antiquated education system that was designed for mid-20th century learning and is now out of date. Surely, if the COVID pandemic has taught us anything, is that there shouldn't be any rush to go back to normal. But that lack of ambition for our education system has been compounded by a generation of a political establishment that have sought to see our education system as an afterthought. And I think we need something better. We absolutely need a broader vision of something more substantial, of how not only can we go back to and bring our children back to education, but how can we educate them in places that are exceptional, in buildings that are suitable, with teachers that we're paying appropriately. One of the things that I've raised an eyebrow over the last couple of weeks, and particularly in the last couple of days, was the very welcome decision to remove calculated grades and the historical parts of that from our Leaving Cert next week, was that now we're being told that disadvantaged students won't be disadvantaged as a consequence of that. And certainly that's very welcome in the context of the Leaving Cert. But let me be very clear. From the very moment a child enters our education system, they are met with incredible degree of inequality. A student coming from a poorer household will start primary school with less language skills. Yesterday, the CSO figures yesterday found that 1 in 5 children in this country are living in conditions of enforced deprivation. Those same children go through the very ranks. They go through primary school, they start secondary school at the same level of inequality, go to 4th, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th year, and then we expect them to sit a Leaving Cert, knowing that those same kids were the ones that didn't have access to a nutritious meal. They didn't have access to a warm coat, standard provisions in terms of their clothing, and they didn't have access to, in modern times, it's Wi-Fi access, and they're the ones that were at the forefront of the tech inequality when students had to remove themselves from class. That's not fair. Education in this country does not happen in isolation, and we cannot separate the environment in which a child is educated from the system in which they're being educated in. And it is grotesquely insulting to believe that combating disadvantage in this country stops at removing historical grading from the Leaving Cert, because it doesn't. If the Department of Education say that childhood deprivation and poverty has nothing got to do with them and they take the hands-off approach, I would fully disagree. And don't tell us that that's fair, because it simply isn't. We need a broader vision for what education and combating disadvantage in our skills looks like, that extends beyond the realms of every year we enable a scenario where a couple of kids can squeeze through the ranks and then we convince ourselves that that's okay, because it simply isn't. And if you're looking for evidence of that, have a look at the Irish Times feeder skills list every year, where you'll see that students who go to private schools or schools in wealthier area, they're the ones that get access to the highest level, to the universities, and students who are in low-income communities are disproportionately impacted by that. Education, poverty, inequality and disadvantage are intrinsically linked. We've removed one small component of that to make the situation better, but it certainly isn't to a satisfactory level. I also want to talk about fairness, because fairness has come up in the last while. And yesterday we had the 4 unions in to represent teachers in our schools. And teachers in our schools have done an incredible job, and it's been lamentable the commentary that's taken hold in some of our public commentary over summer that hasn't been respectful to the role of our teachers and our SNAs and our skills secretaries. And I want to acknowledge that work that's done by them. But I don't just want to acknowledge it. I want to say, when you go into our school, every staff room in this country has a reflection of unfairness bedded in it, because teachers who are doing the exact same job are being paid disproportionately, just simply because of the year in which they started. So a vision for education that extends well beyond the rush to return to normality would see fairness, not only in terms of how we educate our children and the conditions in which they engage in that, but how we pay our teachers. Another exceptionally important component of our education system have come to the forefront during the pandemic is our SNAs. Our SNAs are incredibly, incredibly valuable to society, but we aren't appreciating them. And if we are to really acknowledge the role of the special needs assistants in our school, well then, over the course of this 33rd Dáil, a vision for a better education would be a professionalisation of the SNA community, and paying them appropriately, improving their condition, making the role across the school standardised, so one SNA in one school doesn't have an entirely different role to another SNA in another school. And that's fundamentally important, to have actual vision for education that extends just beyond returning to a 20th century antiquated, outdated mode of education.